Hello, everyone. I'm Barack Obama. Today, I want to take you back to the beginning of my life, to the years that shaped my values, my worldview, and the dreams I would carry forward. That I was born on August 4th, 1961, in Honolulu, Hawaii. My father, Barack Obama Sr., was an economist from Kenya, and my mother, in Dunham, was a white woman from Kansas, intelligent, warm, and full of curiosity. My family background was unusual for the time. My father came from a distant African nation, while my mother grew up in the heartland of the United States. Being one of the few mixed-race children in my community meant that from an early age, I was already thinking about identity, culture, and belonging. My early life was not always easy. My parents separated when I was very young, and I was raised primarily by my mother. Despite the challenges, my mother instilled in me a deep respect for education. She encouraged independence, hard work, and curiosity about the world. Growing up in Hawaii, I was immersed in a rich, multicultural environment. Hawaii taught me tolerance and respect for differences, and it shaped the lens through which I would later see the world. That I also spent several years living in Indonesia with my mother and her new husband. Living there exposed me to very different ways of life and made me aware of the inequalities that many people face. Those years taught me adaptability and resilience, and they sparked an early awareness of social issues, a curiosity that would guide much of my future work. Even as a child, books and school held a special place in my life. I loved reading, especially history and literature. These books opened up worlds beyond my immediate surroundings. They helped me understand the past and imagine possibilities for the future. I began writing early, not just as a way to express myself, but as a tool to think deeply and make sense of the world around me. Looking back, I didn't fully understand what it meant to have dreams, but I knew I wanted to explore, to learn, and to make a difference in some way. Those early experiences laid the foundation for my future path, whether in law, community service, or eventually politics. The curiosity, empathy, and sense of responsibility that grew during those years have stayed with me throughout my life. After my childhood in Hawaii and a few years living in Indonesia, I returned to Hawaii as a teenager. These were formative years, filled with both excitement and uncertainty, a time when I began to ask bigger questions about who I was, where I belonged, and what I wanted my life to mean. That I attended the Punahou School in Honolulu, a rigorous and academically demanding environment. At first, it was intimidating. I was one of the few students of color, and I often felt like an outsider. But over time, I discovered that my voice mattered. I learned how to navigate a world that sometimes felt unfamiliar, how to speak up, and how to listen carefully. These lessons in adaptability and self-awareness would become central to my growth. Academically, I was drawn to history, literature, and social studies. I was captivated by stories of people who challenged injustice, who fought for equality, and who reshaped their communities. I remember reading about the civil rights movement, the courage of activists like Martin Luther King Jr., and the struggles faced by ordinary people striving for dignity. These stories resonated deeply with me. They made me reflect on my own identity as the son of a Kenyan father and an American mother, and on the responsibilities that came with that awareness. Outside of the classroom, I began to explore my interests and passions. Sports, especially basketball, offered a sense of community and focus. On the court, I learned discipline, teamwork, and the importance of perseverance. I also began writing more seriously, journaling my thoughts, experimenting with poetry, and reflecting on my experiences. Writing became a way to process my emotions, clarify my ideas, and understand the world around me. After graduating from high school, I left Hawaii for Occidental College in Los Angeles. Moving to the mainland was a major transition. I was away from my family, living in a large city, navigating independence for the first time. These were years of discovery, experimentation, and growth. I met people from diverse backgrounds and perspectives, and I started to see the world in more complex ways. Conversations with classmates, exposure to new ideas, and immersion in city life pushed me to question assumptions and broaden my understanding of society. After 2 years at Occidental, I transferred to Columbia University in New York City. Columbia was intense, intellectually stimulating, and sometimes overwhelming. I studied political science with a focus on international relations. I was fascinated by how governments operate, how societies structure themselves, and how policy decisions ripple across the lives of millions of people. Living in New York, I could not ignore the stark contrasts around me: the wealth, the poverty, the inequality, and the vibrancy of urban life. These experiences shaped my commitment to public service and social justice. During my time at Columbia, I also began to reflect more deeply on my own identity. I thought about what it meant to be a black man in America, the son of a Kenyan father who I knew only partially, and a white mother who had nurtured and guided me. I began to recognize the unique perspective my background offered and the responsibility that came with it. I wanted to find a path where I could connect with people, make a meaningful impact, and address the challenges I had seen firsthand. After graduating from Columbia, I returned to Chicago and began working as a community organizer. This period, while technically post-college, was a continuation of my education in the broader sense. I worked in neighborhoods struggling with poverty, failing schools, and limited opportunity. I met people whose lives were shaped by forces far beyond their control, and I listened to their stories, their hopes, and their frustrations. It was here that I learned the true meaning of leadership, not just giving speeches or creating policy, but building trust, listening, and acting with empathy. Eventually, I decided to pursue a law degree at Harvard Law School. Harvard was a demanding and competitive environment, but it pushed me to grow intellectually and personally. I became the first Black president of the Harvard Law Review, a position that brought visibility, responsibility, and an even greater sense of purpose. Those years taught me how to analyze complex problems, communicate effectively, and navigate challenging environments, all skills that would be essential in the years to come. Looking back, this chapter of my life, high school, college, community work, and law school, was about more than academic achievement. It was about finding my voice, understanding the world, and beginning to envision the kind of life I wanted to lead. These experiences taught me that education is not just about knowledge, but about empathy, curiosity, resilience, and courage. They showed me that personal growth is inseparable from understanding and serving others. As I reflect on these years, I realize that every challenge, every book, every conversation, and every small success contributed to my journey. The curiosity and determination I developed during these years would follow me into my work, my community involvement, and eventually, my political career. Education, in the broadest sense, had opened my eyes to both possibility and responsibility. After several years working as a community organizer, I realized that to make broader, lasting change, I needed to enter the political arena. I wanted to address issues not only at the local level, but also through legislation that could improve education, healthcare, and economic opportunity across entire communities. This realization led me to run for the Illinois State Senate in 1996. Running for office was a new challenge. Campaigning required strategy, communication, and connecting with a diverse group of voters. I spent countless hours meeting constituents, listening to their stories, and understanding their concerns. Door-to-door visits, neighborhood meetings, and community events became the rhythm of my days. I learned firsthand the importance of accessibility and trust. Politics was no longer an abstract concept. It was about real people, real struggles, and real solutions. Winning the election was both exhilarating and humbling. Serving in the Illinois Senate gave me the opportunity to turn the lessons from my community organizing into legislative action. I focused on issues that had tangible effects on people's lives, improving public education, expanding healthcare access, and creating economic opportunities for working families. I worked to bridge divides, often reaching across the aisle to find common ground. Negotiation, compromise, and collaboration became essential skills. During my time in the Senate, I learned that progress is rarely straightforward. Passing legislation often involved lengthy discussions, differing priorities, and bureaucratic hurdles. But I also learned the power of persistence. Every small victory, whether funding for a school program or support for a community initiative, was a step toward making life better for constituents. These incremental changes reinforced my belief in the importance of principled, patient, and committed public service. It was also during these years that I began gaining recognition beyond Illinois. My speeches, my approach to issues, and my personal story began to draw attention at the state and national levels. I participated in conferences, gave talks, and engaged with media outlets, gradually building a reputation as a thoughtful, articulate, and solutions-focused politician that I am. In 2004, a defining moment came when I was invited to speak at the Democratic National Convention. Standing on that stage, I spoke about unity, hope, and the idea that America can live up to its highest ideals. The speech resonated with millions of people across the country. It was a turning point, not just in my political career, but in my understanding of the power of words and ideas to inspire action. This period taught me important lessons about leadership, responsibility, and public service. I realized that being a public figure comes with both opportunity and scrutiny, and that integrity must remain central, even under pressure. I learned to navigate the tension between personal conviction and political compromise, always guided by the principle that the work of government is ultimately about improving people's lives. Looking back, my years in the Illinois State Senate and the recognition I gained nationally prepared me for the next phase of my journey, running for the United States Senate and stepping onto the national stage. Those years reinforced my belief that meaningful change comes from listening, learning, and leading with purpose. They taught me that public service is both a privilege and a responsibility, a lesson that would guide me throughout the rest of my career. By the end of this phase, I had not only grown as a politician, but also as a person. I understood the importance of empathy, communication, and perseverance. I had seen firsthand how dedicated, principled work could make a difference. And I was ready to take the next step, confident that the foundation I had built in Chicago and in the Illinois Senate would carry me forward into national politics. After graduating from Harvard Law School, I returned to Chicago, a city that had always felt like a second home during my earlier community organizing experiences. Chicago was vibrant, diverse, and at times overwhelming. But more than that, it was a place where I felt a responsibility to engage, to listen, and to try to make a difference. That I began working as a community organizer on the south side of Chicago, focusing on neighborhoods struggling with poverty, underfunded schools, and limited opportunities. Those years were perhaps the most eye-opening of my adult life. I met people who were working tirelessly for their families, people who faced systemic obstacles yet refused to give up hope. I learned that leadership was not about titles, fame, or accolades. It was about listening, understanding, and helping people find their own strength. Each day in the community was a lesson. I visited public housing projects, held meetings at community centers, and organized residents to tackle real-world problems, like improving local schools, increasing access to job training programs, and advocating for fair treatment by city agencies. I witnessed frustration, heartbreak, and resilience, all at once. I began to understand that change often comes slowly and requires patience, collaboration, and perseverance. During this time, I also reflected deeply on my own identity. Growing up as the son of a Kenyan father and a white American mother, I was acutely aware of race and the ways it shaped opportunity and perception in America. Working in Chicago reinforced this awareness. I saw the disparities that existed and the effects of historical and systemic inequality on people's lives. These experiences strengthened my commitment to social justice and to building bridges across communities. Community organizing was challenging work. It required not only dedication, but humility. I learned to listen more than I spoke, to observe before acting, and to always consider the perspectives of those I sought to help. I discovered that trust is built slowly, that meaningful relationships are the foundation for any lasting impact. These lessons would later inform every step of my political career. That I also began to see how larger systems, government policies, economic structures, and social programs shaped the daily realities of people I worked with. While community organizing allowed me to address immediate needs, I realized that political engagement offered an opportunity to create change on a broader scale. Slowly, the idea of entering public office started to take shape, not for personal ambition, but as a means to extend my ability to serve. It was during this period that I began thinking seriously about running for office. I considered what I could realistically achieve, how to build credibility, and how to stay true to my principles while navigating a complex political landscape. I spent countless hours talking with mentors, colleagues, and community members. I reflected on what kind of leader I wanted to be, someone who listens, who empowers others, and who focuses on results rather than rhetoric. These years of community work also shaped my understanding of hope. I realized that progress is rarely linear, that setbacks are inevitable, and that meaningful change requires both vision and patience. I learned that leadership is not just about speaking to an audience, but about connecting with people, understanding their struggles, and helping them envision a better future. Looking back, this first phase of my early career, community organizing, learning from the people of Chicago, and grappling with the realities of inequality, was essential preparation for my eventual entry into elected office. It taught me empathy, resilience, and the power of collective action. Most importantly, it instilled in me the belief that ordinary people, when organized and motivated, can drive extraordinary change. By the end of this period, I knew I was ready to take the next step, running for public office. I had seen the challenges, I had learned the lessons, and I felt a responsibility to try to make a difference on a larger stage. My journey into politics was beginning, not yet national in scope, but grounded in experience, guided by principle, and inspired by the hope that change is possible when we work together. After my time in the Illinois State Senate and the recognition I gained on the national stage, I realized that I wanted to make an even greater impact. I had seen firsthand the power of local and state-level change, but I also recognized the limitations. Many of the issues I cared about, healthcare, economic inequality, civil rights, and foreign policy, required action at the federal level. It was clear to me that the next step was to run for the United States Senate. Running for the U.S. Senate in 2004 was both exhilarating and daunting. I was entering a race that drew attention not just from Illinois, but from the entire nation. The campaign demanded every ounce of focus, energy, and strategy one could muster. I spent countless hours traveling across Illinois. Town hall meetings, community centers, and neighborhood gatherings became my daily routine. I wanted to listen to people directly, understand their challenges, and ensure that my campaign reflected their hopes and needs. The campaign trail was intense. I faced scrutiny, tough questions, and a political environment that could be unforgiving. Yet, I drew strength from my experiences as a community organizer and as a state senator. I had learned to listen, to empathize, and to communicate with authenticity. I understood that people respond to sincerity, to leaders who are willing to acknowledge challenges while offering hope and solutions. Winning the Senate seat was a moment of profound responsibility. I knew that holding this office was not just a personal achievement. It was an opportunity to serve millions of Americans, to tackle issues that mattered deeply, and to bring the lessons I had learned in Chicago and the Illinois Senate to the national stage. I felt both pride and humility, acutely aware of the trust placed in me by my constituents. Once in the Senate, I quickly realized that the scale of work was unlike anything I had experienced before. The U.S. Senate is a place where history, tradition, and procedure intersect with the urgent needs of millions. I spent my first weeks and months learning the rhythms of the chamber, understanding the legislative process at the federal level, and building relationships with colleagues across the political spectrum. Patience, persistence, and diplomacy became essential tools that I focused on legislation that reflected my long-standing priorities: expanding access to healthcare, improving education, supporting veterans, and addressing social and economic inequalities. I worked tirelessly on committees, drafting bills, negotiating language, and collaborating with fellow senators and staff. I also traveled back to Illinois frequently, maintaining close contact with constituents, listening to their concerns, and ensuring their voices guided my decisions in Washington. One of the most important lessons during these early years in the Senate was understanding the balance between vision and pragmatism. Ambitious goals are important, but success often requires compromise, coalition building, and incremental progress. I learned that being an effective legislator meant navigating complex political dynamics while staying true to core principles, a skill I would continue to refine throughout my career. At the same time, I was becoming more visible nationally. My speeches, my approach to problem solving, and my personal story began to resonate beyond Illinois. Media coverage and public attention grew, and with it came a new set of responsibilities and expectations. I realized that I now had a platform to influence not just legislation, but also public discourse. I could speak to the hopes and concerns of Americans across the country, and I felt a growing responsibility to do so thoughtfully and honestly. Reflecting on these early Senate years, I see them as a critical bridge between my work at the state level and the broader national stage. They were years of learning, of growth, and of careful preparation. I honed my legislative skills, deepened my understanding of national and international issues, and developed a clearer sense of the kind of leader I wanted to be. Principled, empathetic, and dedicated to creating opportunity for others. By the end of this first phase of my Senate career, I had built a foundation of experience, credibility, and vision. I understood the challenges of federal office, the importance of coalition building, and the value of connecting with people both at home and across the nation. Most importantly, I recognized that leadership is measured not by personal ambition, but by the ability to serve, inspire, and make a meaningful difference in the lives of others. By the time I had settled into my role in the United States Senate, I realized that this position offered an unparalleled opportunity to make a difference on issues that affected millions of Americans. I focused on legislation that could create tangible improvements in people's lives: education, healthcare, veterans' benefits, and economic opportunity. One of my earliest priorities was education. I believed that every child, regardless of background or zip code, deserved access to high-quality schools. I worked on initiatives aimed at improving public education, increasing funding for programs that supported underserved students, and expanding opportunities for teachers and schools to innovate. I knew from my time in Chicago and my own upbringing that education could open doors and change the trajectory of a child's life. Healthcare was another critical focus. I recognized the struggles faced by families who lacked access to basic medical care, the elderly who could not afford prescriptions, and the millions working hard yet still falling through the cracks. I advocated for policies that expanded access to care, reduced costs, and addressed disparities. This work often involved detailed research, negotiations with colleagues, and engaging with experts and community leaders to find practical, sustainable solutions. In addition to domestic policy, I increasingly engaged in discussions on foreign policy. I had always been interested in global affairs, and serving in the Senate offered an opportunity to contribute to debates on America's role in the world. I studied conflicts, diplomacy, and international cooperation, understanding that our actions abroad could have profound consequences at home and around the world. I also participated in committees that examined arms control, human rights, and U.S. foreign aid, learning how complex and interconnected global issues truly are. During these years, my profile on the national stage began to grow. I delivered speeches at conferences, participated in televised interviews, and wrote op-eds that reached a wider audience. People began to notice not just my legislative work, but the way I approach politics, with thoughtfulness, integrity, and an emphasis on hope and unity. This period marked the beginning of my national recognition, but it also came with new challenges: increased scrutiny, public expectations, and the need to communicate clearly to a broader audience. One defining moment came during debates on key legislation where bipartisan support was crucial. I learned the art of negotiation and the importance of building relationships with colleagues across the aisle. Compromise did not mean abandoning principles. It meant finding common ground that could achieve meaningful results for the American people. These experiences taught me patience, resilience, and strategic thinking, all of which would be essential in the years ahead. Another lesson from this period was the power of storytelling. I realized that policy alone could not inspire people. People needed to understand why it mattered, how it affected their lives, and how collective action could create change. I worked to frame issues in ways that connected with people's everyday experiences, emphasizing shared values and common goals. This approach helped me gain trust, communicate effectively, and inspire engagement from a wider audience. Throughout my Senate years, I remained deeply connected to Illinois. I traveled extensively across the state, holding town halls, attending community events, and listening to constituents. These visits reminded me of why I entered public service in the first place: to serve people, understand their struggles, and advocate for solutions that would make a real difference. Maintaining this connection grounded me, keeping me accountable, and guiding my legislative priorities. By the end of this phase, I had accomplished significant milestones: sponsoring key legislation, raising awareness on critical issues, and establishing a growing national profile. But perhaps more importantly, I had developed a deeper understanding of leadership, responsibility, and the potential to inspire change. I recognized that true leadership requires both vision and action, empathy and strategy, courage and patience. These years laid the groundwork for the next step in my journey: running for the presidency. My legislative accomplishments, coupled with a rising national profile, provided the platform I needed to reach a broader audience and articulate a message of hope, unity, and possibility. I was beginning to see that the principles I had learned in Chicago, the lessons from my early political career, and the values instilled in me since childhood could resonate with people across the country, and perhaps, one day, with the nation as a whole. By the mid-2000s, my work in the U.S. Senate had brought me national attention. People were responding not just to my policy work, but to my story, my approach to leadership, and the way I spoke about hope and unity. I began to realize that my journey could reach beyond Illinois and potentially inspire millions of Americans across the country. Running for the presidency was a thought that I approached with both seriousness and humility. I understood the weight of such a decision, the scrutiny it would invite, and the responsibility it carried. But I also felt a sense of purpose, a belief that my experiences, values, and vision could contribute meaningfully to the national conversation and offer a message of hope for the future. Preparation for a presidential campaign was unlike anything I had experienced before. It required meticulous planning, a deep understanding of national issues, and a readiness to engage with people from every corner of the country. I worked closely with advisors, mentors, and trusted colleagues to refine my ideas, craft a message that could resonate broadly, and develop a campaign strategy that was both practical and inspiring. That I spent months traveling, listening, and learning. I visited communities facing economic hardship, schools struggling with limited resources, neighborhoods where people felt disconnected from the political process. I listened to their stories, their frustrations, and their aspirations. I wanted to understand not just policy needs, but the hopes and fears of ordinary Americans. This groundwork was essential, not only for building a campaign, but for ensuring that my work would remain grounded in service and authenticity at the same time. I continued my legislative work in the Senate, balancing constituent needs with the demands of a potential national campaign. This period required discipline and focus as I navigated complex policy debates, legislative negotiations, and public appearances. I learned to prioritize, delegate, and stay true to the principles that had guided me from my earliest days as a community organizer. One of the most important aspects of this phase was recognizing the power of communication. I had learned in the Senate that policy alone is not enough. People need to understand why it matters and how it affects their lives. Crafting speeches, writing op-eds, and speaking directly to communities became central to building trust and inspiring engagement. I focused on conveying a message of unity, hope, and collective responsibility, ideas that had guided me throughout my career and that I believe could resonate nationally. As my profile grew, I encountered both support and skepticism. Many people were inspired by the possibility of new leadership, while others questioned my experience and readiness. I understood that public scrutiny was part of the responsibility of leadership. Rather than discouraging me, it motivated me to work harder, to prepare more thoroughly, and to remain focused on the larger purpose, serving the American people. During this period, I also reflected deeply on my personal values and motivations. I thought about my family, my upbringing in Hawaii and Indonesia, my experiences in Chicago, and the lessons I had learned in the Illinois State Senate. I realized that all of these experiences had prepared me to articulate a vision that could unite people across differences and inspire action toward common goals. Leadership, I understood, was about service, empathy, and the courage to confront challenges with integrity and optimism. By the end of this phase, I felt ready to take the leap into the national arena. My work in the Senate had honed my skills, my outreach and community engagement had grounded me, and my national recognition provided a platform to connect with people on a larger scale. I knew the journey ahead would be arduous, unpredictable, and transformative, but I was prepared to meet it with the same dedication, resilience, and hope that had guided me throughout my life. This was the moment when the possibility of the presidency began to feel tangible. It was not just about ambition or recognition. It was about the opportunity to serve the country in the most meaningful way I could imagine, to bring people together, and to help America live up to its highest ideals. The preparation, reflection, and learning during this period laid the foundation for what would become a historic campaign, and ultimately, a new chapter in my life and in the nation's history. Deciding to run for president was one of the most significant decisions of my life. I reflected on my journey, from my childhood in Hawaii and Indonesia, to my years organizing communities in Chicago, to my time in the Illinois State Senate and the U.S. Senate. Every experience had shaped me, prepared me, and strengthened my belief that I could contribute meaningfully to the nation at a historic moment. Launching a presidential campaign was both exhilarating and daunting. The scale, scrutiny, and stakes were unlike anything I had encountered before. I knew that running for the highest office in the land would require relentless preparation, deep focus, and unwavering commitment. My team and I spent months planning strategy, refining messaging, and identifying states and communities where we could build support. From the very beginning, I wanted this campaign to reflect my principles: hope, unity, and the belief that change is possible when people come together. I understood that the country faced real challenges: economic inequality, healthcare gaps, political division, and international uncertainty. But I also believed in the American spirit and the ability of citizens to rise above partisan divides to achieve progress. The early months of the campaign were filled with travel, speeches, interviews, and community engagement. I crisscrossed the country, visiting small towns, urban centers, and rural communities, listening to people's stories and concerns. I wanted to understand their struggles firsthand: families worried about healthcare, students facing educational challenges, workers anxious about job security. Each story reminded me why I was running and grounded my message in real-life experiences. As we entered the primary season, the campaign intensified. Competing against established politicians required strategy, perseverance, and careful communication. I learned to balance detailed policy discussions with the need to inspire and connect with voters on a personal level. Town halls, debates, and media appearances became daily routines, demanding stamina and focus. But more than anything, they were opportunities to engage directly with the American people and to articulate a vision for the future. The primary debates were defining moments. Standing on those stages, I had to present my ideas clearly, answer challenging questions, and demonstrate that I could lead the nation with integrity and competence. I understood that voters were evaluating not only my policies, but also my character, my judgment, and my ability to handle complex challenges. These experiences reinforced the importance of preparation, clarity, and staying true to my principles. During the primaries, I also became increasingly aware of the historic nature of my campaign. Many Americans saw the possibility of electing the first Black president as a significant milestone. While I never wanted my candidacy to be defined solely by race, I recognized its symbolic importance and the responsibility it carried. It reinforced my commitment to representing all Americans and promoting a message of unity rather than division. Campaigning was grueling. Long days, endless travel, and constant public scrutiny could be exhausting. But I drew energy from the people I met and the stories they shared. I saw families working hard, communities striving for opportunity, and citizens yearning for hope and progress. Their experiences became the foundation of my campaign message, one of optimism, engagement, and the belief that together, we could overcome challenges. By the end of the primary season, we had built momentum and gained recognition nationwide. The victories in early primary states were crucial, not just for delegate counts, but for signaling that Americans were resonating with our vision. The campaign taught me lessons about resilience, strategy, and the power of grassroots organizing on a national scale. Looking back on this first phase of the presidential campaign, I see it as a period of immense growth and learning. It required balancing ambition with humility, strategy with authenticity, and communication with listening. It was a moment when my experiences, from community organizing to legislative work, converged, allowing me to articulate a vision that inspired millions of people. This was only the beginning, but it laid the groundwork for the next phase: the general election and the opportunity to connect with the entire nation. After a hard-fought primary season, the next phase of the campaign began: the general election. Competing for the presidency meant connecting with Americans across the entire country, from small towns to large cities, from rural communities to urban centers. It was a moment of immense responsibility, and I understood that every decision, every speech, and every interaction mattered. The general election campaign was unlike anything I had experienced before. It demanded constant travel, careful messaging, and the ability to respond to a wide range of issues quickly and thoughtfully. I spent countless hours meeting voters, attending town halls, and participating in debates. Listening remained central to my approach. I wanted to hear directly from people about their concerns, hopes, and aspirations. These conversations shaped the way I communicated my vision for the nation. Debates during the general election were particularly intense. Facing an experienced opponent, I had to articulate my ideas clearly, demonstrate knowledge of complex policy issues, and show that I could lead with both competence and empathy. Each debate was a test of preparation, composure, and clarity. I approached these moments with the belief that authenticity and honesty were more powerful than any rehearsed line or political tactic. Throughout the campaign, I also remained mindful of the historic nature of the election. Many Americans saw this race as a milestone in the nation's history, the possibility of electing the first Black president carrying both symbolic and real significance. While I never wanted my candidacy to be defined solely by race, I understood the responsibility it carried and the opportunity it provided to inspire hope and demonstrate the progress our country could achieve. Grassroots organizing played a crucial role in the campaign. Volunteers, community leaders, and everyday citizens across the nation devoted time, energy, and resources to building support. I often reflected on my own experiences as a community organizer in Chicago, how listening, empathy, and persistent engagement could create meaningful change. The campaign relied on that same philosophy, connecting with people, empowering communities, and inspiring participation in the democratic process. The weeks leading up to Election Day were a mixture of anticipation, intensity, and reflection. I thought about my family, my journey, and the values that had guided me since childhood. I thought about the challenges facing the country: economic recovery, healthcare access, education, and restoring trust in government. I knew that leadership would require both vision and practical action, empathy and determination, courage and humility. When the election results began to come in, the moments were surreal. The support from millions of Americans across every state reflected not only the campaign's efforts, but also the belief of people in the possibility of progress and unity. The sense of responsibility I felt in that moment was immense. I knew that the trust placed in me was not about me personally, but about the collective hope and aspirations of the nation. Victory on election night was both exhilarating and humbling. It marked the beginning of a new chapter, not just in my life, but in the history of the United States. The journey from community organizer to state legislator, U.S. Senator, and finally, President-elect, had been shaped by countless experiences, lessons, and the people I had met along the way. Every challenge, setback, and success contributed to the preparation needed to assume the highest office in the land. Reflecting on the general election and victory, I understood that the work ahead would be even greater than the campaign. Governing a nation requires listening, learning, and leading with integrity. It demands patience, vision, and the ability to bring people together despite differences. But the election also reinforced my belief in the power of hope, engagement, and collective action. It showed that when people unite around shared values, change is possible. This phase concluded not with an endpoint, but with the beginning of a journey to serve the nation as its president. It was the culmination of years of preparation, reflection, and dedication, a testament to the idea that leadership is earned through service, shaped by experience, and sustained by a commitment to the greater good. The lessons of the campaign would guide me in the challenges and responsibilities of the presidency, setting the stage for the transformative years ahead. Taking the oath of office was a moment of profound responsibility and reflection. As I stood on the steps of the Capitol, looking out at the crowd and the millions watching across the nation, I felt the weight of the trust placed in me. Every decision I would make, every action taken in the coming days, would shape not only my presidency, but the lives of millions of Americans. The first 100 days were intense. I quickly realized that the challenges facing the nation were urgent and complex. The economy was struggling, healthcare gaps persisted, and the country was grappling with the need for both unity and progress. I knew that immediate, decisive action was necessary, but I also understood the importance of careful deliberation and collaboration. From the very beginning, I prioritized domestic policy initiatives aimed at stabilizing the economy, creating jobs, and improving the lives of ordinary Americans. I convened my cabinet and advisors, ensuring that every decision was informed by expertise, experience, and the voices of people directly affected by policies. Listening remained central to my approach. I wanted to understand the realities facing families, students, workers, and communities across the nation. One of the first steps was implementing measures to stimulate economic recovery. We focused on job creation, supporting small businesses, and strengthening financial institutions. These actions required coordination with Congress, engagement with industry leaders, and careful communication with the public to ensure transparency and trust. I spent long hours in meetings, reviewing proposals, and consulting with experts, knowing that the impact of these decisions would be immediate and far-reaching. Healthcare was another top priority. Millions of Americans struggled with access, affordability, and quality of care. I worked to lay the groundwork for reforms that would expand coverage, improve outcomes, and reduce costs. This involved negotiating with legislators, advocating for public understanding, and balancing short-term measures with long-term solutions. I drew on my experience in the Senate, where I had learned the importance of coalition building and pragmatic problem-solving. Education and social programs also demanded attention. I focused on initiatives to improve public schools, expand early childhood education, and support programs that empowered communities. I understood that a nation's strength is built on the opportunities available to its citizens, and that investing in education was investing in the future. During these early months, I also faced the challenge of uniting a nation divided by politics, ideology, and differing perspectives. I spent time communicating directly with citizens through speeches, interviews, and town halls. I emphasized the themes of hope, collaboration, and shared responsibility, knowing that leadership is as much about inspiring confidence as it is about enacting policy. These first 100 days taught me important lessons about decision-making under pressure, the necessity of balancing urgency with prudence, and the importance of maintaining focus on the long-term goals of the presidency. Each success, each setback, and each negotiation contributed to my growth as a leader and reinforced the principles that had guided me throughout my life. Integrity, empathy, and a commitment to service. By the end of this initial period, I had begun to establish a rhythm and a foundation for the work of the presidency. I had implemented immediate measures to address pressing challenges, laid the groundwork for longer-term reforms, and continued to engage with the American people. The lessons of these first months would guide my administration, providing insight into the complexities of leadership, the power of collaboration, and the importance of staying grounded in the responsibilities entrusted to me. As the first months of my presidency unfolded, I was acutely aware of the magnitude of the economic challenges facing the nation. The country was in the midst of a financial crisis. Millions of Americans were losing their jobs, and families were struggling to make ends meet. These were not abstract numbers or statistics. They were real people, real lives, and real fears. My responsibility was clear: to act decisively, thoughtfully, and with urgency. Stabilizing the economy became an immediate priority. I worked closely with my economic advisors, Treasury officials, and Congress to craft policies that could prevent further collapse, create jobs, and restore confidence. It was a delicate balance. Action needed to be swift, but it also had to be strategic and sustainable. I spent long hours in briefings, reviewing proposals, and consulting with experts to ensure that every decision was informed, practical, and aimed at achieving the greatest impact. One of the first steps was the implementation of stimulus measures designed to jumpstart the economy. We focused on infrastructure investment, support for small businesses, and programs that put Americans back to work. These initiatives were about more than numbers. They were about restoring hope and stability for families, communities, and entire industries. I knew that economic recovery required both immediate relief and long-term planning. Healthcare reform was another critical focus. Millions of Americans lacked access to affordable, quality care, and the disparities in health outcomes were unacceptable. Drawing on my years in the Senate and the lessons from my earlier work, I engaged in detailed negotiations, listening to stakeholders, health experts, and citizens alike. I sought to create a system that expanded coverage, improved care, and reduced costs. I knew it would not be easy. There were entrenched interests, partisan debates, and complex regulations to navigate, but the stakes demanded perseverance that I in parallel with legislative efforts. I communicated directly with the American people. I understood that major reforms, whether economic or healthcare related, required public understanding and engagement. Through speeches, interviews, and town halls, I explained the rationale behind policies, acknowledged concerns, and emphasized the shared responsibility we all had in building a stronger, fairer nation. Communication became a tool not just for policy advocacy, but for uniting citizens around common goals. Economic and healthcare reforms were deeply interconnected. A strong economy supported better health outcomes, and accessible healthcare provided stability for families, enabling them to contribute more effectively to the workforce. I approached these challenges holistically, understanding that complex problems demanded comprehensive solutions. I often reflected on my own upbringing and the communities I had served, how economic insecurity and lack of access to healthcare affected people's daily lives, and I used those reflections to guide policy decisions. Negotiating these reforms required patience, resilience, and a willingness to collaborate across party lines. Compromise was essential, but I remained steadfast in my principles. The goal was not political victory, but meaningful, lasting improvements in the lives of Americans. Each discussion, each amendment, and each legislative maneuver reinforced the importance of focus, empathy, and strategic leadership. These months of grappling with economic and healthcare challenges were intense, exhausting, and deeply instructive. I witnessed the resilience of the American people, the dedication of my team, and the power of thoughtful, principled governance. I also recognized the limitations of leadership, the need to balance immediate action with long-term vision, to navigate conflicting priorities, and to maintain trust with the public. By the end of this phase, I had overseen the implementation of critical economic measures and advanced significant healthcare reforms. The progress achieved, while imperfect, provided stability and hope. More importantly, it demonstrated that government, when guided by competence, integrity, and empathy, can respond effectively to crises, protect its citizens, and lay the foundation for future prosperity. These experiences deepened my understanding of governance, reinforced my commitment to public service, and prepared me for the next set of challenges in foreign policy and international leadership. The lessons learned from managing economic turbulence and healthcare reform would guide my decisions throughout the remainder of my first term and beyond. While domestic issues occupied much of my attention during the first term, I was acutely aware that America's role in the world required careful, principled leadership. Foreign policy is rarely abstract. It directly affects the safety, prosperity, and values of our nation. From the outset, I aim to approach international challenges with a balance of diplomacy, strategic vision, and moral clarity. One of the first priorities was addressing ongoing conflicts abroad. I inherited military engagements in Iraq and Afghanistan, complex situations with profound consequences for U.S. service members, allies, and local populations. I engaged closely with military leaders, foreign policy advisors, and international partners to assess the realities on the ground. It was critical to make decisions informed by intelligence, grounded in strategic objectives, and mindful of humanitarian concerns. Diplomacy became a central tool in shaping America's global presence. I met with leaders from around the world, seeking cooperation on issues ranging from counterterrorism to climate change. I recognized that effective diplomacy required listening as much as speaking, understanding the motivations of other nations, and building coalitions capable of achieving shared goals. Negotiation, patience, and mutual respect were essential for advancing American interests while promoting global stability. Counterterrorism was a defining component of my foreign policy agenda. Protecting the United States from threats required vigilance, intelligence operations, and international cooperation. I made the difficult decision to prioritize missions that would target terrorist networks directly, while simultaneously committing to international law and ethical standards. These decisions were not easy. They involved risk, careful deliberation, and an awareness of the long-term implications for U.S. credibility and security. Another key focus was global economic stability and development. I worked with allies and international institutions to address economic crises abroad, recognizing that global markets are interconnected and that instability elsewhere can affect American workers and families. Initiatives to promote trade, development, and financial cooperation were integral to maintaining global confidence and advancing shared prosperity. climate change, and environmental leadership also became critical issues. I understood that the United States had both an opportunity and a responsibility to lead in sustainable energy and international climate initiatives. Through negotiations, policy measures, and advocacy on the world stage, I aim to position America as a leader in promoting environmental stewardship while fostering economic growth. Throughout these foreign policy efforts, communication was vital. I regularly addressed the American people to explain the rationale behind decisions, provide context for international developments, and convey the broader goals of my administration. Transparency, when possible, fostered trust and helped citizens understand the complexities of global leadership. I believed it was essential that people see the humanity, strategy, and responsibility behind decisions made on their behalf. Leadership on the global stage also required moral clarity. I grappled with decisions that carried ethical weight: how to balance national security with civil liberties, how to respond to humanitarian crises, and how to uphold America's values while protecting strategic interests. Each decision demanded reflection, consultation, and a commitment to principles that have guided my public life. Fairness, justice, and responsibility. By the end of my first term, I had established a framework for America's engagement with the world, one that emphasized diplomacy, multilateral cooperation, and strategic action. The experiences gained during this period deepened my understanding of leadership, reinforced the importance of foresight and ethical judgment, and shaped my approach to the second term. Reflecting on my first term, I realized that domestic progress and global leadership are deeply intertwined. Economic stability, healthcare, education, and social programs at home empower America to act responsibly abroad. Similarly, careful and principled engagement with the world strengthens our nation's security and influence, enabling us to better serve our citizens. These lessons would guide every decision, every initiative, and every challenge in the years to come. As I began my second term, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point, the lessons of my first term, the trust placed in me by the American people, and the challenges that remained. I understood that the second term presented a unique opportunity to consolidate progress, tackle unfinished business, and lay the groundwork for lasting change across domestic policy areas. One of my foremost goals was to continue advancing healthcare reform. The Affordable Care Act had provided millions of Americans with access to coverage, but there was still more work to do. I focused on improving the system, making care more affordable, expanding preventive services, and ensuring that no American would have to forego essential health care because of cost or circumstance. I engaged closely with legislators, healthcare professionals, and citizens to refine policies, address gaps, and implement practical solutions. Education was another priority. I believe that the strength of our nation depends on the opportunities available to our children and young adults. In my second term, I worked to expand access to early childhood education, strengthen public schools, and promote higher education affordability. Programs that supported teachers, students, and communities remained central to these efforts. I wanted every child, regardless of background, to have the tools to reach their full potential. Economic policy continued to be a critical focus. The recovery from the financial crisis was ongoing, and I recognized the importance of fostering job creation, supporting small businesses, and ensuring that the benefits of growth reached all Americans. I championed initiatives that encouraged innovation, investment in infrastructure, and workforce development. Every policy was considered with a long-term perspective, balancing immediate relief with sustainable growth and opportunity. Social programs and equality were also at the center of my agenda. I sought to address disparities in income, healthcare, and opportunity, while advancing protections for civil rights. I believe that a society is strongest when it empowers its most vulnerable members, providing both support and pathways to self-sufficiency. Policies promoting social justice, fairness, and opportunity guided my domestic priorities throughout the second term. In pursuing these goals, I relied on a combination of experience, consultation, and communication. I met regularly with advisors, community leaders, and members of Congress, seeking perspectives that could inform effective policy. I also communicated directly with citizens through speeches, interviews, and town halls, explaining initiatives, listening to feedback, and emphasizing shared responsibility for progress. Leadership, I had learned, requires both action and engagement at the same time. I was mindful of the political environment. Governing requires navigating complex dynamics, building coalitions, and understanding that meaningful progress often comes incrementally. I remained committed to principles of integrity, transparency, and pragmatism, focusing on solutions that could withstand scrutiny and deliver real results. The second term also allowed me to focus on long-term domestic goals, including energy policy, climate initiatives, and technological innovation. I saw these areas as critical for ensuring that future generations would inherit a nation that was not only prosperous, but sustainable and resilient. Policies promoting clean energy, reducing dependence on fossil fuels, and encouraging research and innovation became integral to the domestic agenda. Reflecting on the beginning of the second term, I felt a deep sense of responsibility and purpose. The work of governing is rarely simple, and the expectations of the American people are high. Yet, these challenges are also what make public service meaningful. Each policy, each initiative, and each decision was guided by the goal of improving lives, creating opportunity, and advancing the values that have guided me throughout my life. Empathy, integrity, and dedication to service that be why focusing on healthcare, education, economic growth, social equality, and sustainable development, I sought to make the second term not just a continuation of progress, but a period of meaningful, lasting impact. The lessons of the first term, listening, collaboration, persistence, and principled leadership, provided the foundation for tackling these challenges and setting ambitious domestic priorities for the years ahead. As my second term began, I knew that economic recovery remained one of the nation's most pressing concerns. While significant progress had been made since the financial crisis, many Americans were still struggling to regain financial stability, find secure employment, and achieve long-term economic security. Addressing these challenges required sustained attention, strategic action, and a commitment to inclusive growth. Job creation remained a top priority. I worked closely with Congress, business leaders, and local communities to promote policies that encouraged investment, innovation, and workforce development. Infrastructure projects, from roads and bridges to energy systems and technology initiatives, were not just about construction. They were about creating sustainable employment, strengthening communities, and preparing the economy for the future. Each initiative was designed to balance immediate relief with long-term growth, ensuring that investments delivered tangible benefits to everyday Americans. Small businesses were also central to economic recovery. I recognize that entrepreneurs drive innovation, create jobs, and strengthen local economies. Policies aimed at providing access to capital, reducing regulatory burdens, and supporting entrepreneurial education were integral to helping small businesses thrive. I often met with business owners directly, listening to their experiences and incorporating their insights into policy solutions. Global economic challenges were intertwined with domestic recovery. International markets, trade relations, and economic stability abroad had direct impacts on American workers and industries. I focused on fostering international cooperation, promoting fair trade agreements, and ensuring that U.S. economic policies were aligned with global realities. Navigating these complexities required collaboration with allies, negotiations with trading partners, and careful assessment of potential risks and benefits at the same time. I remained committed to addressing the underlying causes of economic inequality. Policies promoting education, job training, and workforce development were essential to ensure that growth benefited all Americans. I emphasized access to opportunities, support for disadvantaged communities, and programs that enabled upward mobility. I believe that a strong economy is not only measured by GDP or market indices, but by the ability of every citizen to achieve their potential and contribute meaningfully to society. Healthcare, while often discussed as a social priority, also had profound economic implications. Expanding access to care reduced financial strain on families, increased workforce productivity, and strengthened the stability of communities. I worked to ensure that healthcare reforms continued to be implemented effectively, addressing both affordability and quality. This required collaboration with insurers, hospitals, and legislators, as well as ongoing engagement with the public to explain policies and address concerns. International challenges during the second term were multifaceted. Global security threats, economic volatility, and environmental concerns demanded coordinated responses. I engaged with foreign leaders, multilateral organizations, and international experts to address these issues thoughtfully. Maintaining America's leadership on the world stage meant balancing domestic priorities with strategic global engagement. I approached these responsibilities with the understanding that domestic prosperity and international influence are deeply connected. Throughout these efforts, communication and transparency were essential. I regularly addressed the American people to explain the rationale behind economic and foreign policy decisions, to provide context for global developments, and to build confidence in the direction of the administration. Leadership requires not just action, but also the ability to inspire trust and understanding among citizens who are directly affected by policies. The economic and international challenges of the second term were complex, often unpredictable, and sometimes daunting. Yet, they provided an opportunity to apply the lessons of my first term: careful deliberation, collaboration, resilience, and principled leadership. Each policy, negotiation, and decision reinforced the importance of listening, strategic thinking, and the long-term vision necessary to guide the nation through turbulent times. By addressing domestic economic recovery while engaging thoughtfully on the international stage, I aim to ensure that America remained resilient, prosperous, and capable of leading in a rapidly changing world. These efforts laid the groundwork for the continuation of key reforms, strengthened global partnerships, and prepared the country to face the emerging challenges of the decade ahead. During my second term, I knew that progress on domestic social priorities remained essential to improving the lives of millions of Americans. Healthcare, social programs, and climate initiatives were not isolated issues. They were deeply interconnected, influencing the economy, public health, education, and the long-term well-being of the nation. Healthcare reform continued to be a central focus. While the Affordable Care Act had expanded access to millions, gaps still existed and many challenges remained. I worked to strengthen the law, ensuring that preventive care, prescription coverage, and support for chronic conditions were accessible to all. I engaged closely with legislators, healthcare providers, and communities, listening to feedback and refining policies to maximize effectiveness. My goal was to create a system that was both equitable and sustainable, providing security for families while controlling costs. Social programs beyond healthcare were equally critical. Education, job training, and programs supporting low-income communities received renewed emphasis. I sought to expand early childhood education, improve K-12 outcomes, and increase college affordability. Workforce development initiatives were also prioritized, linking skills training with employment opportunities. I believe that empowering citizens through education and opportunity was essential for building a strong, resilient nation. Social equity remained a guiding principle. I worked on policies addressing disparities in income, access to services, and protection of civil rights. From supporting initiatives for historically underserved communities to promoting fairness and inclusion in employment and education, I emphasize that a society's strength is measured by how it supports its most vulnerable members. Each program and policy was designed with the goal of fostering dignity, opportunity, and upward mobility. Climate and environmental initiatives became increasingly central to domestic policy. I recognized that the long-term prosperity and security of the nation depended on sustainable energy, conservation, and a commitment to addressing climate change. Policies promoting clean energy, reducing carbon emissions, and investing in renewable technologies were advanced alongside economic and social programs. I worked to balance innovation and regulation, ensuring that progress on climate goals would also support economic growth and job creation. Implementation of these initiatives required extensive coordination. I met with state and local leaders, scientists, business executives, and advocates to ensure that policies were practical, impactful, and responsive to community needs. I also communicated directly with the American people, explaining the rationale behind each initiative, highlighting successes, and addressing challenges openly. Transparency and engagement were essential to building trust and achieving meaningful change. Healthcare, social programs, and climate initiatives were not just policy priorities. They were reflections of values I had carried throughout my life: empathy, responsibility, and a commitment to service. Each decision required balancing immediate needs with long-term outcomes, ensuring that initiatives would improve lives today while preserving resources and opportunities for future generations. The second term allowed me to build upon the foundations laid in the first term, strengthening systems that could deliver sustainable benefits. I learned that effective leadership requires persistence, adaptability, and collaboration. Policies are only as strong as the people who implement them, the communities that support them, and the public that understands and engages with them. Reflecting on this period, I felt that the work on healthcare, social programs, and climate initiatives represented a core mission of my presidency. Improving quality of life, expanding opportunity, and protecting the planet for future generations. These priorities shaped not only the trajectory of my administration, but also the legacy I hope to leave. A vision of a nation committed to fairness, progress, and responsible stewardship. During my second term, foreign policy and national security remained among the most critical responsibilities of the presidency. The world was complex, interconnected, and rapidly changing, and America's leadership carried both opportunity and obligation. I approached these challenges with a combination of strategy, diplomacy, and moral clarity, striving to protect our nation while advancing global stability and cooperation. One of the first priorities was national security and counterterrorism. I continued efforts to dismantle terrorist networks, relying on intelligence, military strategy, and international cooperation. Decisions in this arena were difficult and often carried significant risks, but the responsibility to protect American lives required careful, decisive action. Each choice demanded reflection, consultation, and an awareness of long-term consequences. Diplomacy was central to my approach. I engaged with world leaders, negotiated international agreements, and worked to strengthen alliances that were vital to global security and economic stability. From climate accords to trade negotiations, from nuclear non-proliferation to conflict resolution, I sought to position the United States as a principled and constructive leader on the world stage. Building trust, maintaining open channels of communication, and finding common ground were essential to achieving meaningful progress. International conflicts presented ongoing challenges. The situations in the Middle East, the rise of new geopolitical tensions, and global crises required careful assessment and nuanced responses. I prioritized strategies that combined military readiness with diplomatic engagement, always mindful of the human consequences of policy decisions. My goal was to advance peace, security, and human rights while protecting American interests. Global leadership also required addressing emerging threats such as cybersecurity, pandemics, and climate change. I worked to build international coalitions capable of responding effectively, recognizing that challenges in one region could have direct implications for national security and economic stability. These efforts demanded coordination with allies, federal agencies, and private sector experts to create comprehensive, forward-looking strategies. Throughout my second term, I frequently reflected on the moral and ethical dimensions of leadership. Decisions about military action, intervention, and diplomacy carried weight not only in immediate outcomes, but in the historical record and the values we uphold as a nation. I sought to act with integrity, guided by principles of justice, human rights, and accountability, understanding that America's credibility is tied to our commitment to these ideals. At the same time, I considered the broader legacy of my administration. Leadership is not only measured by policies passed or crises managed, but by the long-term impact on the nation's character, institutions, and global standing. I aim to leave a presidency defined by principled action, progress on domestic and international fronts, and a commitment to expanding opportunity, fairness, and justice for all Americans. Throughout these years, I drew strength from the American people, whose resilience, engagement, and dedication inspired every decision. I recognize that the presidency is ultimately a service role, a role that demands listening, acting with courage, and holding oneself accountable to the citizens who place their trust in leadership. Reflecting on the second term, I see it as a period of consolidation, growth, and preparation for the challenges that lie ahead. Domestic accomplishments, healthcare reforms, social programs, climate initiatives, and international leadership all combined to define the trajectory of the administration. While challenges persisted, the progress made demonstrated the power of principled leadership, collaboration, and persistent effort in advancing the interests of the nation and the world. Ultimately, The work of the second term reinforced lessons I had learned throughout my life and career, that leadership is grounded in empathy, integrity, and vision, that meaningful change requires persistence and collaboration, and that the measure of a presidency is found not only in accomplishments, but in the ability to inspire, empower, and serve the people with dedication and honor. Leaving the White House was a profoundly emotional moment. After 8 years of service, of living within the constant demands and responsibilities of the presidency, stepping away was both a relief and a reminder of the extraordinary journey I had experienced. I walked through the halls one last time, reflecting on the decisions made, the victories celebrated, and the challenges overcome. Every corner of the residence, every meeting room, carried memories of moments that shaped the nation and defined my own life. Transitioning from the presidency involved more than just leaving an office. It required a shift in identity. For years, my days had been consumed by urgent matters, national security, policy deliberations, and public engagement. Suddenly, I found myself outside the daily rhythm of governance, observing the world from a different perspective. It was a period for reflection, for understanding what I had accomplished, and for contemplating what still remained to be done in service of the public. That I spent considerable time reflecting on both the successes and the limitations of my administration. There were policies I was proud of: healthcare reform that expanded access, initiatives to strengthen education, social programs that supported vulnerable communities, and climate and energy policies aimed at securing a sustainable future. Yet I also recognize that every administration faces constraints, compromises, and the realities of complex governance. Not every initiative achieved its intended outcome, and some efforts fell short of the ideal. Reflection required honesty, humility, and a commitment to learning from both triumphs and setbacks. The transition period was also an opportunity to engage with the next generation of leaders. I considered what lessons my experiences could provide: the importance of listening, the value of collaboration, the necessity of principled decision-making, and the enduring responsibility that comes with public service. I hoped that my time in office, both its successes and its challenges, could inspire others to engage thoughtfully and courageously in the work of governance. Family played a central role during this period. My wife, Michelle, and our daughters had shared the sacrifices, triumphs, and intensity of public life. Their support, resilience, and love were essential throughout the presidency, and stepping away provided an opportunity to reconnect, celebrate achievements, and enjoy moments of normalcy that had been rare during those years. Personal reflection intertwined with family life, offering both grounding and perspective. As I left the White House, I also considered my place in history. I understood that the presidency is larger than any one individual. It is a reflection of the people, the institutions, and the enduring principles of democracy. My hope was that my administration would be remembered not only for the policies enacted, but for the values it embodied: hope, inclusivity, empathy, and a commitment to progress. Reflecting on the past, I recognize that leadership is as much about the journey and the lessons learned as it is about the outcomes achieved. In stepping away from the presidency, I embraced a new role, that of a citizen once more, but a citizen shaped indelibly by the responsibilities of leading a nation. This transition was a period of learning, recalibration, and preparation for the ways in which I could continue to serve, through advocacy, mentorship, public engagement, and continued efforts to advance causes I believed would strengthen the country and the world. Looking back, I realized that the privilege of serving as president had provided a unique vantage point from which to understand both the challenges and the promise of America. Reflection allowed me to assess the impact of decisions, the evolution of the nation, and the enduring importance of civic engagement. Leaving the White House was not an end. It was the beginning of a new chapter in public service, guided by the lessons, values, and experiences that had defined my journey in office. After leaving the White House, I knew that public service did not end with the presidency. While the formal responsibilities of the office were behind me, the opportunity and obligation to contribute to society, support communities, and engage in global issues remained. I wanted to use the experience, platform, and network I had developed to make a continued impact, both domestically and internationally. One of the first priorities was establishing the Obama Foundation. The foundation was designed to empower future leaders, foster civic engagement, and support programs that advance opportunity and equality. Through mentorship, leadership programs, and community initiatives, we aim to cultivate a new generation of changemakers, people committed to serving their communities and addressing the challenges of the 21st century. It was deeply rewarding to see young leaders engage with ideas, strategies, and programs that could make a tangible difference. Civic engagement and education were central pillars of this work. I frequently spoke at universities, conferences, and public events, sharing experiences from my presidency, lessons learned, and the importance of active citizenship. I emphasized that democracy thrives when citizens participate, when voices are heard, and when individuals take responsibility for shaping the society in which they live. Inspiring engagement was as important as policy work because it ensured that the future of the nation was in capable, thoughtful hands. Global engagement remained a priority. I continued to collaborate with international organizations, leaders, and NGOs on issues ranging from global health and climate change to democracy and human rights. Initiatives such as the Young African Leaders Program reflected my belief that supporting emerging leaders worldwide strengthens communities, fosters stability, and promotes collaboration across borders. By providing education, mentorship, and resources, we could empower individuals to address local challenges while contributing to global progress. Advocacy for social justice, equality, and human rights remained at the heart of my post-presidency work. I spoke out on issues such as voting rights, economic inequality, and access to quality education. I also lent support to initiatives addressing public health, poverty alleviation, and community development. These efforts were rooted in the belief that a society's strength is measured by how it treats its most vulnerable members, and that leadership extends beyond political office into active service and moral responsibility. Philanthropy became another avenue for impact. Collaborating with organizations across the country and around the world, I worked to channel resources, expertise, and attention to communities in need. Whether through disaster relief, education initiatives, or health programs, the goal was to leverage the influence and experience I had gained to create meaningful, sustainable change. Every partnership, project, and effort was an opportunity to connect with people, understand their needs, and provide tangible support. In all these activities, I remain mindful of the lessons learned during my presidency. That progress requires patience, collaboration, and persistence. That solutions must be evidence-based and inclusive, and that empowering others is often the most effective form of leadership. Post-presidency life allowed me to apply these principles in new ways, supporting initiatives, mentoring leaders, and amplifying voices that might otherwise go unheard. Through public service, advocacy, and global engagement, I sought to continue making a difference. While the work was different from the presidency, it remained guided by the same values: empathy, integrity, and a commitment to service. Each initiative, partnership, and program was a reflection of the belief that leadership is not limited to holding office, but is expressed through action, influence, and the impact we have on the lives of others. Reflecting on this stage of life, I felt that my post-presidency work was not merely a continuation of my public life, but a deepening of it, a chance to focus on building the foundations for future leaders, addressing persistent global and domestic challenges, and ensuring that the principles I valued continued to shape the world in meaningful ways. One of the most important aspects of post-presidency life was finding balance between public responsibilities and family life. Michelle, Malia, and Sasha had been central to every moment of my presidency, and stepping away from the daily demands of office allowed us to reconnect in ways that had been rare over the previous 8 years. Family life became a source of grounding, joy, and reflection, a reminder of what truly matters beyond policies and politics. Being present for my daughters, watching them grow, supporting their pursuits, and sharing everyday moments was profoundly fulfilling. Michelle and I reflected on the unique experiences we had shared and the lessons we hoped to pass on, not only about public service, but about integrity, resilience, and the importance of empathy in every facet of life. Our family's journey illustrated that leadership and service are intertwined with personal values and relationships. Legacy was a constant consideration. I often reflected on how my presidency and subsequent work would be remembered, not in fleeting headlines, but in the lasting impact on communities, institutions, and the lives of individuals. I hoped that the policies, initiatives, and programs we advanced would endure, but I also recognize that a true legacy is measured by the inspiration and empowerment provided to future generations. The work of leadership is never fully complete. It continues in those who are motivated, engaged, and prepared to carry forward the vision of a stronger, fairer, and more inclusive society. That I also contemplated the broader lessons for civic engagement and governance. Leadership is not confined to elected office. It extends into communities, organizations, and everyday actions. Each citizen has the capacity to shape society through participation, empathy, and responsibility. Post-presidency offered the chance to model this principle through advocacy, mentorship, and the initiatives I supported, reinforcing the idea that influence can be exercised in multiple, meaningful ways. Global perspective remained important. I continued to engage with international leaders, support programs that fostered global cooperation, and advocate for policies addressing pressing worldwide challenges. These experiences reinforced the interconnectedness of local and global efforts and highlighted the enduring responsibility of American citizens and leaders to contribute constructively to the world. Leadership, after all, is not only about immediate accomplishments, but also about fostering sustainable, positive change over time. Reflecting on personal growth, I recognized that both the presidency and post-presidency had been profound learning experiences. Every challenge, success, and setback offered insights about resilience, collaboration, and moral responsibility. I understood that the pursuit of meaningful impact is ongoing, requiring reflection, adaptability, and a commitment to principles that transcend office and tenure. Ultimately, post-presidency life is a chapter defined by service, reflection, and the cultivation of legacy. It is a time to prioritize family, nurture future leaders, continue public engagement, and support initiatives that advance justice, opportunity, and sustainability. My hope is that these efforts, combined with the work undertaken during my presidency, contribute to a vision of America that is stronger, fairer, and more resilient. A nation capable of facing challenges with empathy, courage, and unity. As I look to the future, I remain committed to contributing wherever I can, guided by the values that have shaped my life: service, integrity, and the belief that progress is achieved through collaboration, thoughtful action, and unwavering dedication to the well-being of others. The journey of public life continues, not in the title held, but in the impact made, the lives touched, and the inspiration provided for generations to come.